Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lauren Gleason, and I am a geriatrician at the University of Chicago. I'm joined today by Kathryn West, who is an LCSW, and she is the Transformation Impact Manager of ECHO Chicago. Today, we are going to review resiliency techniques, and this talk was initially designed as part of our COVID-19 ECHO series for skilled nursing facilities. We have three main objectives today for our talk. The first is to identify common stressors in the healthcare workforce and individual healthcare workers face before, during, and after crisis. We will define resiliency as and self-care, and we'll review some tools such as the emotional education and grounding techniques. So why is this important? This slide here shows a report from the Kaiser Family Foundation, which was released in April 2021. This study looked at and surveyed over 1,000 frontline healthcare workers, and the results are rather sobering. Healthcare workers who were surveyed are experiencing stress across many areas, including trouble sleeping, headaches, increased substance use, feeling burnt out, and anxious. Just over 1 in 10 have received mental health services, and almost 2 out of 10 thought that they needed services but hadn't received them for a variety of different reasons. Sadly, mental health is often still stigmatized, and it's really time to change this. Our health and well-being depends upon it, as well as our ability to continue to care for residents in our nursing home depend on this. And when we have crisis, unexpected crises can happen. There can be a pandemic with a new pathogen, as we've seen with COVID-19. There could be a natural disaster, which can strike and bring mass casualties, a nuclear reactor explosion in an extreme, or some new disaster that we can't even imagine yet. Actions taken before, during, and after crisis will increase the likelihood that you and your workforce will cope or even thrive following. So how do physicians and other healthcare workers respond to these crises? Stresses in crisis can come from many sources, and this figure here shows some of the sources. There could be a life threat, so a threat to someone's personal or family health, or an exposure that they've experienced. A loss, they could have a loss of a colleague or a threat to professional mastery or identity. There could be an inner conflict, such as a moral injury, where someone's values and aspirations are kind of conflicted and with what they have to accomplish in their everyday work. Or just a fatigue injury from wear and tear, feeling simply worn out by the relentless demands without time for rest and recovery. How physicians and other healthcare workers are supported during this time of acute stress impacts whether they're able to cope and then even recover from the crisis. Alternatively, they might develop unhealthy coping mechanisms and show signs of stress, such as burnout, insomnia, or even worse, chronic stress can lead to depression, anxiety, PTSD, or substance abuse. Fortunately, the progression from a stress reaction to a stress injury to chronic stress illness is not inevitable. Proactive institutional supports before crisis, such as stress first aid, or delivered during the crisis, such as recovery aid, can increase the odds that individuals will recover and thrive. And we're going to go over some of these techniques later on during this talk. What does safety mean? A psychologically safe environment increases predictability. Creating ways to support our staff during distressing circumstances can help with well-being. So what does safety encompass? A safe work environment includes a place where you have security, disaster planning, and procedures such as a code or a fire drill. And creating safety within a trauma-informed framework really exceeds these expectations. When we embrace trauma-informed framework, we go beyond these expectations and compliance standards to include emotional safety and psychological safety. And this is where the development of a strong safety culture begins, when the people, being the residents, family, and staff, feel empowered to speak up and discuss challenges. There is an understanding throughout the facility that there is zero tolerance for blaming, bullying, or retaliation. Further, to fully employ this trauma-informed principles, the organization needs to have ways to constructively process distressing circumstances. Do staff feel unsafe in your facility? There's no doubt that we do not want to work in environments in places where people don't feel safe. And our instinct to kind of say is that we already do this. We believe that we provide these safe environments for our workforce and for individuals to work. But the reality is, sometimes we can say things that can trigger or re-traumatize another person without knowing it. And now we're going to talk about resiliency and self-care. We'll shift focus a little bit here. So when I talk about resiliency, it's really the ability to overcome challenges of all kinds of trauma, tragedy, personal crises, or just plain old life problems, and bounce back stronger, wiser, and more powerful. Now, I'd like you all who are listening to this to do a self-care check-in. So what do you think of when you think of self-care? And think about your life and yourself. What are 1 to 2 things you do right now for your self-care? And this is a slide I just wanted to share that was shared with me from one of my mentors during my training. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. If you're not taking care of yourself and living your life in a happy, fulfilling way, then you can't care for others and you can't function at your job. So it's really important that we continue with our self-care. And now I'm going to pass this over to Kathryn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Gleason. I think it's really important that we talk about what self-care is, because I think it's a term we hear a lot. And I'm sure all of the things that you all thought of as you were doing that thought exercise a few slides ago, that all counts as self-care. There's, I think, no right or wrong way to do self-care. I like to think that self-care isn't something that is just a daily life activity we need to accomplish, but it's those things that kind of refill our coffers, the things that make us feel more capable of handling the world and make us feel good about ourselves. I think we need to be really careful when we're talking about self-care, that we're not kind of being brought into this idea that self-care is just something that we can accomplish by buying things. I think there are whole industries around the idea, or around convincing us that if we just buy that bath bomb or that face mask, that we'll be okay, and that's what self-care is. And I think we need to step away from that capitalist marketing and think about really what we need individually to fill ourselves up. It's about knowing yourself and taking stock of how to move forward with your own well-being. And I think it's important to know that what counts as self-care for one person will be very different from what counts as self-care for another person. So, for example, if you are somebody who really likes to exercise, maybe that's something that really refills you. For somebody else, it could just be a daily life activity that they're doing to keep themselves well. That difference is really in how the activity, how you feel about that activity and what it does for your own sense of self and well-being, not what the activity is. And so I like to think about different dimensions of self-care, because I think it's important that we don't just think about what we're doing for ourselves, but how we're doing it at these various levels, whether it's community levels, interpersonal levels, within the organizations we work in. So we can start with the things that you do personally for you. And there are some things that I think can be universally or almost universally good self-care techniques, like journaling. Therapy is always a good one if you feel like you want to or need to talk with somebody. Meditation, mindfulness, doing grounding exercises, and I'll share a couple of my favorites in just a few minutes. For me, reading is always a great self-care activity. It's always something I enjoy. It's something that refills me. And again, we're thinking about not those daily life to-dos that keep us living and going, but the things that really make us feel good. So for some people, that might look like cooking. They might really love the process of cooking a really decadent meal and sharing it with loved ones. For somebody else, cooking might just be a means to an end. They need to cook something in order to eat it, in order to get the fuel their body needs. And both of those are appropriate responses to the activity of cooking. But for one person, it's just what they need to do to get through the day. And for another person, it's a really important portion of self-care. So it's necessary to kind of take stock for yourself of those things that feel good, those things that refill you, and being able to differentiate a little bit between those things that again, are refilling, are bringing you back up versus those things that you just have to do, and knowing that that will be different for you than it is for anybody else. In addition to this personal dimension of self-care, I like to think about the interpersonal dimension and kind of the communal ways that we can think about self-care. So maybe that means ways that you can support your friends and they can support you in your self-care. Maybe it's activities that you like to do together. Maybe it means calling a trusted loved one for support when you've had a really hard day, knowing where and how to ask for support from your community when you need it. Things like mutual aid can be a portion of self-care. It really is about figuring out how you can connect with others in service of your well-being and theirs. Support groups can be a really important part of that. Group therapy, if that's something that you're engaged with, can be great. But again, it's thinking about how in relationship to others can you refill those parts of you that are maybe being depleted by the stress, the burnout that you're experiencing because of these very real crises that you deal with in your day-to-day work. Another dimension of it is structural and ways that we can support systems to meet our needs. And that can be in a couple of different ways. So you can think about that within the organization that you work in. How can your organization structurally help to support you, and how can you advocate for those things that you need? If there are initiatives that would help you within your workplace to thrive, how can you and your coworkers advocate for those things and provide those things for one another? Maybe that means having a buddy who you can talk to and debrief with after a really difficult shift. Maybe that means helping to think creatively about what policies would be useful for you to promote that well-being. Maybe it's different types of professional development you can ask for, or different structures around things like PTO. It can also be things in our larger society that we're advocating for. Maybe it means advocacy around things that matter to you outside of the work that you're doing, but that make you feel like a more integrated and whole part of the community that you live in. It can mean voting or becoming involved in kind of the broader national sense of what community means, or it can be on a really local level. So again, this is thinking about how you can connect the things around you in your community that make you feel whole, that can help you refill yourself, and can also help advocate for that refilling from other people, because we are all so connected to one another. I think, yeah, so some other factors I want to come back to as we're thinking about self-care as a whole. I think one really important part is being able to name and identify your emotions so that you know what you're feeling. When we can name what we're feeling, it takes some of the power of that emotion away to control us, because if we know what we're feeling, we can make more active choices about how we want to respond to situations, knowing that the emotions that we're feeling is giving us some important information, but not all of the information about what the situation is. So if I can identify in a situation that I'm feeling anxious about something, I can choose if I want to respond based on what that anxiety is bringing to me, or if there are other factors that I need to be considering as well in terms of what the whole of the situation is. It's important to set really good boundaries and to feel empowered to enforce those. Boundaries are not something that we can force other people to enact. It's really what boundaries we're setting up for ourselves. So we should be thinking about boundaries as things that you can create and you can set. So that might mean if you are in a stressful situation, it might mean that you can't control the situation itself, but your boundary might mean that you're taking yourself out of it if you feel like you need to. Of course, not in, that can be tricky in a work specific situation, but thinking about how you can enact those boundaries. And also to remember that self-care can be really hard, that we live in a society that is going through a lot with this pandemic, that we live in a society that really values productivity above a lot of other things, and that self-care is pushing back against those things in ways that can be uncomfortable sometimes. And so, but that holding that space is really important, and it really is what you need to be able to sustain you in this important work over the long term. While self-care can be hard, I think it's also important to know that self-care should make us feel good at the end of the day. So if you're beating yourself up because of something that you're doing for self-care, it's time to try a new technique. If you are set on the idea that yoga is your version of self-care, and you come to the realization that you are dragging yourself to yoga class every week, maybe that's not the right self-care technique for you. Maybe it's time to reevaluate and figure out what it is that would refill you. It doesn't mean that self-care can never be something that is challenging, but it should mean that it's something that overall makes us feel good. And again, knowing that what self-care is changes person by person, it's okay to also think about self-care changing over time. What makes you feel good at one point, what counts as self-care for you at one point in time, might change over your lifetime, and that's okay. It's good to be able to readjust and think about what you need in this version of you in this moment. And I think our next slide and our last slide is just some sample exercises that I want to share. 3 really quick, easy things that you can do that help you reconnect to where you are in the moment, what you're feeling, do some of that emotion naming that we talked about, and figure out what kind of self-care you might need. And also kind of how to build some of those resiliency muscles inside yourself, so that as you encounter stressful situations, you have some kind of built-in things in your toolbox that you can go to help you take a step back. You might still need to be engaged in whatever that is, especially in a work environment. You might not be able to fully step out, but if you can kind of step back a little bit emotionally, it can be really helpful to getting through whatever that stressor is. So the first is a technique called box breathing. The basic idea is, imagine a square, a little box, right? 4 equal sides. Each side is 4 seconds. The first 4 is inhale, then you want to hold for 4 seconds, then you exhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, and you do it again. And we can try it for 1 or 2 sets. I find it's really useful to commit to doing at least 5. That helps to kind of calm down our nervous system and take a step back from where we are, remind our bodies that we are safe, because when we feel anxious or angry or sad, our bodies can kind of supercharge some of those things like breathing. We breathe more quickly, our bodies feel like they are in distress, and then it's harder to regulate our emotions or kind of engage in those situations. If we can calm our breathing down, it helps to remind our bodies that we are safe in that moment. So we can try that box breathing. So we'll inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. And you can keep doing that. You can pick whatever interval works for you. If it's easier for you to do 2 seconds or 3 seconds or 8 seconds, whatever it is, figure out what that interval is for you, but keep it the same for all four sides of that box. An emotion identification technique that I really like, that I was taught a while back, is this idea of kind of ranking how strongly we feel our emotions. So the first thing that we want to do is, if you can, you'll close your eyes. If you can't, you can just do it in whatever environment you're in, and take some of those deep breaths. You can do the box breathing, or you can just do a few, maybe 3 deep breaths in and out. And then you want to try to identify what your emotion is that you're feeling. And this should be when you're in the midst of something that's stressful, You can practice it when you're not, but this should be something that's happening that's a little bit stressful. Once you've done that deep breathing, kind of given yourself a chance to collect yourself, identify what that emotion is, because like I said, when we can name our emotions, we know how we want to engage with them a little bit better than if we're just feeling them. So whatever that emotion is, you name it, you say it in your head. I am feeling angry, I am feeling anxious, I am feeling happy, whatever that emotion is. Then on a scale of 1 to 10, you want to rank for yourself in your head, this is all private and personal, how strongly you're feeling that emotion. With 1 being, I'm barely feeling it at all, and 10 being, this is the most I can ever remember feeling this emotion. This is the most I can imagine ever feeling this emotion. You want to rank it on that scale from 1 to 10. Then you want to use another scale, and you're going to think about how able do you feel to handle that emotion right now. Again, 1 is, this is easy, I can handle it, no problem. 10 is, I cannot handle any more of this emotion at all. And depending on where you are on that scale, you want to just say that number for yourself, say it in your head, and then use that information to make a decision about what you do next. So if you are feeling angry and you're feeling it, maybe you're at like a 6 or a 7, you're pretty angry, it's not the most angry, but you're definitely feeling it, and you're at a 10 in terms of how well you can handle it, you know that's a situation where you need to take a step back, right? You aren't feeling like you can handle that at the moment. Maybe that means tapping out and asking a coworker to step in for something that you're doing. Maybe it means, if you're able to, taking a quick walk outside, doing something to kind of bring you back to center a little bit, because you're realizing that in that moment you can't handle any more of it. We can also have situations where maybe we're feeling an emotion, we're feeling really, really sad, and we're at like a 9 of sadness, but we also feel like we're at like a 5 of being able to handle it. We're really sad, but we're able to handle it in the capacity we're in. And so we know we can stay in that situation and continue to do the work that we're doing, or do whatever it is that we're doing. And so it's just a way to kind of think about what those emotions are, name them, rate how strongly you're feeling them, and rate how strongly or capable you feel of handling that emotion, and then use that to make decisions about what you do next. The last technique I want to share is a grounding technique. It's a really simple 5 senses one, one that you may have encountered before, but it basically engages the 5 senses, starting with 5, and that involves 5 things that you can see. So you want to look around your environment and name in your head 5 things that you can see. Then you go to 4 things that you can feel. And that might mean actually reaching out and touching some things. Maybe I can feel the sweater that I'm wearing and you actually want to kind of touch it. Maybe it's my, cup of coffee and I'm feeling that it's warm, and you want to in your head name what those things are that you're feeling. Then it'll be 3 things that you can hear. So you want to listen really carefully to what's happening around you and notice and say aloud in your head what those 3 things are. 2 things that you can smell, and I realize these last 2 things are a little bit challenging when you're wearing a mask, but do the best you can. 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And if you need to, take a sip of something in front of you, eat a bite of something to have that taste, to really notice it, that's totally fine. But the idea is that we want to reground ourselves to our exact present moment, that when our minds go either far into the future with our worries or far into the past, that we want to be able to bring ourselves right back to where our bodies are in the moment, and that grounding technique can help us do that. So I think that's all the slides that I have, but thank you so much for joining me for these exercises. And to Dr. Gleason, I think, all of this is so important to be able to build those resiliency skills and continue through some of those really hard stressors.
Thank you again, and thank you for your attention and time.